I never thought a night shift could feel like stepping into another world. Most of my life, I had worked as a security guard. Gas stations, convenience stores, small shops. Jobs that weren't glamorous, but they paid the bills. Most nights were uneventful, punctuated by the occasional call about a drunk or someone trying to sneak in after hours. It was monotonous, yes, but predictable. That predictability was comforting in its own way. When I saw the ad for a night security position at the local mall, I thought I had finally found something better. The pay was higher than anything I had earned in years, and the hours weren't terrible, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was just one building, and I imagined it would be quiet, easy work. I pictured myself leaning back in the security office, watching camera feeds, walking through vast hallways that echoed with nothing but my own footsteps. The idea of a building that felt too big for the silence of the night was strangely appealing. I applied immediately. The next day, I got a call from Mr. Hensley, the mall manager. He asked me to come in that afternoon for an interview. I remember feeling a strange mix of excitement and unease. It was sudden, almost too sudden. Desperate, maybe. I couldn't shake the thought that maybe they were so understaffed they'd hire anyone, but I brushed it aside. I needed the job, and the mall wasn't far from my apartment. The interview was quick, almost rushed. Hensley asked the usual questions about my experience, my schedule, and my reliability. But there was something odd about him. Something in the way he ran through the protocols without really paying attention. Cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, hourly patrols. Check the doors, monitor the escalators. Standard stuff, yet the way he said it made my stomach tighten slightly. When he finally looked at me and asked, "Can you start tonight?" I was taken aback. Most places require paperwork, background checks, forms, references. Not this place. But I didn't argue. I nodded, trying not to sound too eager. "Great," he said, rubbing his temples. "We're understaffed. The last few guards didn't last. I hope you'll be different." His words lingered in my mind, unspoken questions pressing against the edges of my thoughts. What did he mean by that? I wanted to ask. But he moved on, handing me a key and telling me to report at 11 p.m. sharp. When I arrived at the mall later that night, the parking lot was nearly empty. The bright chaos of daytime shoppers replaced by a few scattered vehicles, dimly lit under the orange glow of the overhead lamps. The building looked enormous, almost oppressive in its stillness. Something about the vast, quiet space made me pause, a fleeting instinct telling me to turn around and go home. I ignored it, blaming nerves, and walked to the employee entrance. Hensley met me at the door. He was silent, his expression unreadable, and led me through winding corridors to the security office. The office was small, cramped, tucked away in a corner of the sprawling building. Screens lined one wall, each displaying grainy footage from cameras scattered throughout the mall. Check the cameras every 15 to 30 minutes, he repeated, his voice low. Do your rounds. Make sure nothing's out of place. And keep an eye on the escalators in the play area. Things happen there sometimes. He waved it off, as if to dismiss it. But the way he said it made my skin crawl. Things happen, he muttered. I nodded, though a chill ran down my spine. After handing me a printed sheet of instructions and shaking my hand again, he left, leaving me alone with the humming of the monitors. The silence settled over me like a blanket, heavy and suffocating. I sat in front of the screens, flipping through the camera feeds. The stores were dark and still, the escalators motionless. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax. It was just a mall, nothing more. But then, I felt it. A presence behind me. I jumped. A janitor stood in the office doorway, grinning at my reaction. Didn't mean to scare you, buddy. You must be the new guy. His voice was light, casual. I let out a nervous laugh. Yeah, that's me. I didn't know there was a janitor here at night. He shrugged. They always keep one of us around just to clean up, make sure things are ready for the next day. His tone shifted slightly, serious now. Just, follow the rules. You'll see, the rules. He handed me a crumpled piece of paper. I unfolded it, half expecting a joke. It wasn't. Rule 1. Check the security cameras every 15 to 30 minutes. But don't stare for too long. Rule 2. Never look directly at the mannequins after midnight. If they change position, leave immediately. My stomach twisted. You're serious? I whispered. His grin disappeared. Follow them, or you'll end up like the last guy. I laughed nervously. The last guard? He nodded. He quit after one night. I tucked the paper into my pocket and forced myself to focus on my patrol. The mall at night was eerie. More so than I expected. Dim lights cast twisting shadows, each one seeming alive. Every sound, the hum of fluorescent bulbs, the groan of the building settling, was amplified. Footsteps echoed down long corridors that should have been empty. I started my rounds. Some stores were abandoned, some locked, displays peeking out from the darkness. The children's play area was frozen in lifeless silence. The plastic toys alien under emergency lights. The escalators were as still as monuments. I was settling into the routine when I noticed movement in one clothing store. The door was wide open. My flashlight swept across the darkened interior. At first, nothing, just mannequins, still and silent. Then, in the corner of my eye, one shifted slightly. My pulse quickened. I called out to the janitor, frustration masking my fear. No answer. The mannequins were moving. Closer now. One's head turned to face the exit. I bolted. My footsteps echoed in the cavernous space. Behind me, the soft shuffle of fabric. I dared not look back. The mall felt alive, watching, waiting. I reached the restroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But then I saw her, a woman, pale, dark hair draped over her face, standing by the stalls. I blinked. Gone. Collapsing to my knees, I realized the rules were real and I had already broken 2 of them. Rule 3. If a mannequin looks like it's following you, don't look back. Rule 4. Avoid mirrors. My stomach knotted. I had failed. The night was just beginning. I clutched the paper, trembling, as I stepped back out. The faint mumble of voices came from an abandoned store. Rule 5. Do not listen. I forced myself to move, ignoring the rising whispering that seemed almost alive. Footsteps, not human, scraping like wood or plastic. My heart raced. The mannequin was coming. I walked faster, straight ahead, refusing to glance back. Eventually, the sound faded. Relief, but brief. The escalator behind me hummed. Rule 10. Do not investigate. I bolted toward the office. The night stretched on like a nightmare. The mall a living entity. Figures appeared and vanished. Time distorted. The rules became lifelines. I survived each encounter by ignoring fear, by following instructions that seemed nonsensical but essential. By the early morning, only 1 hour remained. My nerves were shredded, my mind on edge. The janitor, or whatever entity he had been, appeared one last time, reminding me that obedience was survival. Then, silence. At 6:01 a.m., Hensley's voice called through the door. Relief. The shift was over. The mall returned to ordinary, mundane reality. But I knew I would never forget the rules, the figures, the oppressive weight of the night. As I left, the parking lot empty and silent, I realized some places were better left alone. Some rules were written for survival, not understanding, and some nights were meant to be survived, not remembered. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Even in broad daylight, the mall seemed impossibly quiet. The shadows in the corners of empty hallways stretching longer than they should. I avoided speaking about it with anyone. No one would understand. I wasn't sure I understood it myself. But the rules, the list, the warning from the janitor, whoever or whatever he was, they haunted me more than the visions themselves. I kept turning the events over in my mind. Why mannequins? Why a janitor that didn't exist? And that woman in the hallway, sobbing, floating just above the ground. It was impossible. Yet every detail felt burned into my memory. Every step, every flicker of light, every creak of the tiles. I knew, deep down, that the night hadn't been an illusion. Something was wrong with that mall. Something I couldn't explain. Something that didn't belong in the ordinary world. The next night, despite my exhaustion, I couldn't resist going back. Part of me wanted answers. Part of me, perhaps a darker part, wanted to test the limits of what I had survived. When I arrived, the parking lot looked different under the night sky. The lamplight cast long pools of light, and the shadows seemed sharper, colder. I held the key tighter than I had the night before, and the unease began in my chest almost immediately. As I walked toward the employee entrance, the silence pressed against me. No cars moved, no distant traffic, not even the faint hum of the streetlights beyond. The mall was a hollow shell, waiting, patient. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach and dust. But beneath that, something metallic lingered, barely perceptible. I shook it off and made my way to the security office, where the monitors flickered in their usual grainy dance. I sat in front of them, my hands trembling slightly. I unfolded the list again. The rules were the same, but tonight they felt heavier, more insistent, almost alive. Rule 1. Check the cameras, but don't stare. Rule 2. Never look at mannequins after midnight. Rule 3. If a mannequin follows, don't look back. Each line of text seemed to pulse in my vision. I didn't want to touch them, yet I needed them. They were the only boundaries between sanity and the chaos that awaited. I began my rounds again, flashlight in hand, footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. The first store I checked was a clothing shop, the same one where I had first noticed the movement. The door was slightly ajar, just as before. My heart beat faster than my steps. I reminded myself that this was reality. Mannequins don't move. People don't disappear and reappear. Yet, as I scanned the dark interior, I caught it again. A subtle shift, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. I turned slowly, remembering the rules, focusing straight ahead, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Behind me, I felt it. A presence, heavy, watching. The mall had become a predator. The mannequins were unjust figures. They were eyes, waiting for a moment of weakness. One had shifted slightly closer to the exit. Head tilted, limbs perfectly stiff. My pulse thundered in my ears. I forced myself forward, ignoring the movements behind me, repeating Rule 3 like a mantra. Don't look back. The children's play area loomed ahead. The bright, garish plastic toys looked alien under the flickering emergency lights. I passed it without incident, but the faintest echo of laughter tickled my ears, distant, hollow, yet unnerving. My stomach knotted. Rule 6. If you hear a child laughing, leave immediately. I clenched my flashlight tighter and turned down another corridor, forcing myself not to acknowledge the sound, not to let it settle in my mind. Then came the sound of fabric, soft, almost deliberate, sliding across the tile behind me. The mannequins, something else? My imagination, I told myself. But it wasn't imagination. The sound followed me, closer with every step. My pulse quickened. My hands were slick with sweat, flashlight shaking. I rounded a corner and forced myself to keep walking straight. The movement behind me stopped, but the tension remained, vibrating in the air. I reached the restroom, the scene replaying in my head. Mirrors, faucets, the lingering smell of cleaning chemicals. My reflection stared back at me, familiar, yet somehow alien. I avoided the mirrors as the rules demanded, forcing my eyes to the tiled floor. And then I heard it. Soft sobbing, faint, barely audible at first, coming from one of the stalls. Rule 9. If you hear someone crying in a dressing room, do not open the door. My instinct screamed against it. Curiosity clawed at me. Yet the rules were clearer than instinct. I backed away slowly, every nerve alert. The sobbing grew louder, more insistent, carrying with it a strange resonance, as if the walls themselves were amplifying the sound. I forced my steps backward toward the security office, unwilling to break another rule, unwilling to test the unknown. Each step was heavy, deliberate, as if the mall itself was weighing me down. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and I realized with a jolt that the shadows weren't static. They moved in a subtle, unnatural rhythm, creeping closer without form, whispering threats I couldn't hear. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a small comfort, but the screen offered nothing but the time. The world outside the mall continued normally, oblivious to what was happening inside. I reminded myself, only the night mattered here. Inside, the mall was a living thing, its arteries winding corridors, empty stores, and silent escalators. I was a trespasser in its body, and every step, every glance, was an invitation for it to test me. I made it back to the office, door locking with a reassuring click behind me. The monitors flickered, some feeds grainy, others darkened entirely. The escalator camera caught my attention immediately. Something stood at the top. Long limbs, stiff joints, pale and indistinct. Its movements were unnatural, gliding rather than stepping, hovering above the steps. Its head turned slowly, as though sensing my gaze, and I snapped my eyes away. Recalling Rule 1: do not stare for too long. The static-filled monitors made me nauseous, buzzing in my ears like a warning I couldn't decipher. I sat, trembling, heart pounding. The rules had saved me thus far, but each step, each breath, reminded me how thin the line was between survival and something else. I couldn't leave. I couldn't stop. I was trapped in a ritual, a maze of rules designed to protect me, while simultaneously testing my resolve. And then the knocking began. Soft at first, tentative, coming from the office door. My hands froze mid-motion. I checked the monitors. The hallway outside was empty, but the knock continued, growing louder, insistent. A voice followed, familiar, yet off. The janitor? Hey, new guy, night's going well? It sounded playful, teasing, but a layer of menace ran beneath. My chest tightened. Rule 8. Lock the security office between 4 and 4:30 a.m. and do not open it. I glanced at the clock. 4:03 a.m. Panic hit. Yet I forced myself to follow the instructions, checking the monitors repeatedly, heart hammering. The knocking stopped. Silence, thick and oppressive, filled the room. Then, he appeared on the screens, grinning, eyes fixed on the camera, body wavering like smoke before dissipating entirely. My pulse raced. Everything around me, every shadow, every movement felt alive, deliberate. I was no longer a guard. I was prey, and the mall was the predator. By the time I allowed myself to breathe again, the clock had passed 4:30 a.m. The janitor, whatever that figure had been, was gone. The silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was expectant, as if the mall itself was waiting for the next move. My muscles ached from hours of tension, and my hands were raw from gripping the flashlight. I knew the worst was over, at least for now. But deep down, I understood that the mall had only revealed part of its intentions. I debated going on another round. Logic told me to stay in the office, to watch the monitors and wait for 6 a.m. when my shift officially ended. But a restless part of me, curiosity, perhaps arrogance, insisted I check one last area, the part of the mall farthest from the security office, the East Wing, abandoned stores and empty corridors that the cameras barely reached. My mind screamed in warning, but I forced my legs to move. As I walked, the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long, grotesque shadows that slithered along the walls. The air smelled stale, metallic, a scent I hadn't noticed before. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing back from corners that should have swallowed the sound. I felt eyes on me, not human eyes, but something older, intelligent, and patient. The mannequins in the empty stores, the lifeless play area, even the escalators. They weren't just props. They were observers. I remembered Rule 3 and forced myself to focus straight ahead, avoiding even the corner of my vision. The East Wing stretched on, a labyrinth of darkened shops. Some stores were shuttered for good, the glass cracked and dusty. Others had displays still in place, mannequins frozen in mid-pose. I passed them carefully, flashlight beam narrow, precise, yet unable to fully suppress the unease curling in my stomach. I had the sense that each movement, each flicker of light was being monitored, catalogued. The mall was alive, and I was intruding on its domain. A faint hum came from one of the abandoned stores. I froze. The sound was mechanical at first, then a low murmur of voices, indistinct but deliberate. My chest tightened. Rule 5. If you hear someone talking inside an abandoned store, do not listen. I forced myself to keep walking, each step heavier than the last. The voices grew louder as I passed. Yet, I resisted the urge to glance inside. My pulse thumped in my ears. Something shifted at the edge of my vision. A figure that wasn't quite human. A shape that mirrored movement, but distorted it, bending reality subtly around it. I turned a corner and froze. The figure of a woman hovered in the hallway ahead, pale, long dark hair obscuring her face. Dressed in outdated clothing, she floated just above the floor, shoulders shaking as if sobbing silently. My throat tightened. I forced my gaze down, recalling Rule 9, and tried to back away. Her presence was suffocating, not because of size, but because of intent. The air around her seemed heavier, charged with something ancient and patient. I stumbled backward, forcing myself toward the nearest corridor that led back to the office. The floor beneath my feet felt different, warmer, almost soft, like walking on something organic. Every instinct told me to run, yet I was constrained by the rules, by the knowledge that breaking them would make me vulnerable. The woman didn't move. She waited, hovering, a phantom of sorrow and menace intertwined. I dared not look, dared not acknowledge her existence beyond the edge of my perception. Then came the escalator, a subtle hum, mechanical and deliberate, echoed through the hallway. Rule 10. If you hear an escalator running, do not investigate. My legs moved of their own accord, retreating toward the office, and I forced my mind to focus on breathing, on counting steps, on anything but the mall's unnatural rhythm. Yet the sensation of being watched didn't ease. The shadows deepened in corners, and the mannequins shifted just slightly, almost imperceptibly. My peripheral vision caught their movements, but every time I blinked, they were still. Or were they? The corridor stretched endlessly. Time itself seemed fractured. My watch read 5:15 a.m., but the events of the night felt as if hours had passed in minutes. My mind struggled to reconcile the shifting chronology. The mall didn't adhere to normal rules. Space, time, and logic were all malleable inside its walls. I realized then that the rules weren't just precautions. They were anchors. Obedience kept me tethered to sanity, or at least survival. I rounded a corner, and the sobbing began again, muffled but insistent. My stomach twisted. It wasn't coming from any of the rooms directly. It resonated from the walls themselves. I gripped the flashlight, forcing each step forward, obeying Rule 9. The crying seemed to intensify with every movement, pulling at my mind, a siren call meant to make me break the rules. I clenched my teeth and pushed forward, praying the office would appear soon. Finally, the familiar door came into view. The relief was immediate, though temporary. As I approached, I noticed movement on the monitors. A shadow, elongated and humanoid, drifted along a corridor in the east wing. I squinted, heart hammering, flashlight shaking. Its limbs were long, joints unnatural, movements stiff yet deliberate. Its head turned as if sensing me, its presence suffocating. I forced my gaze away, repeating the mantra silently. Do not look back. Do not look back. Do not look back. Inside the office, the monitors were grainy, flickering intermittently. I watched, trembling, as the figure's image blurred, then vanished into static. The mechanical hum of the escalator grew louder, but I resisted the urge to check. My hands were clammy, flashlight slick with sweat. The rules had guided me through the worst of it, but the final hour was stretching endlessly. The mall was patient, its horrors deliberate, methodical. Each rule followed, each instruction obeyed. Felt like a lifeline thrown into an ocean of shadows. The knocking came again, soft at first, then louder, deliberate. The office door shivered under the impact. A voice, familiar yet distorted, echoed through the room. The janitor? Open up, new guy. Don't tell me you're scared now. My hands hovered over the lock. Rule 8. Do not open the door. I forced my gaze to the monitors. The hallway was empty, but the knocks persisted, insistent, echoing off the walls. Panic clawed at my chest, but obedience kept me rooted. Then, the figure appeared on the camera. The janitor, or whatever had been masquerading as him, stood inches from the office door, grinning. His body wavered like smoke, dissolving partially before reassembling. The rules were clear, and following them had saved me before. I forced my fingers to stay off the handle, gripping the list like a talisman. Each second stretched into eternity. Finally, he dissipated entirely, leaving the hallway empty, silent, but charged with menace. By 5:45 a.m., the mall seemed to settle into a deceptive calm. The escalators were still, the corridors quiet, mannequins frozen. I slumped in my chair, exhausted, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The final 15 minutes of my shift were agonizing. Each tick of the clock amplified the tension. Every flicker of the lights, every hum of the ventilation system felt deliberate, a warning that the mall's patience had limits. At 6:01 a.m., relief finally arrived. Mr. Hensley's voice, ordinary and human, called through the door. Shift's over. Everything okay in there? My heart leapt. The surreal night gave way to mundane reality, yet my mind struggled to reconcile the two. I unlocked the door and stepped out. The office, the mall, the mannequins, they were ordinary again, or at least appeared so. The weight lifted slightly, though unease lingered. I glanced around the office, scanning for any trace of the night's events. Nothing. No janitor, no pale woman, no hovering figures, no shifting shadows. The mall was a normal place again, but I knew better. I had survived by following rules I barely understood, through terror that defied logic. Some things weren't meant to be understood, only obeyed. I left the mall that morning feeling hollow, my body exhausted, my mind racing. The sun cast warm golden light across the parking lot, and for a moment, I thought the world had returned to normal. Cars moved in and out, people chatted on their phones, and birds called in the distance. But I knew the truth. The mall had revealed itself at night. A hidden reality layered over the mundane. Its rules, its shadows, its figures. They lingered in my memory like a second heartbeat. I drove home slowly, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Every stoplight, every passing car seemed to echo the tension of the previous night. My mind replayed the events like a film I couldn't stop. The janitor, the pale woman, the shifting mannequins, the escalator figure, all impossible and yet undeniably real. I didn't speak a word to anyone. How could I explain the rules? How could I describe following them to survive? No one would believe me. And perhaps, in some way, I didn't even want them to. At home, I sat at the kitchen table, the crumpled list still in my pocket. I unfolded it carefully, rereading each rule, feeling the weight of its authority. Rule 1. Check the cameras, but don't stare. Rule 2. Never look at mannequins after midnight. Rule 3. If a mannequin looks like it's following you, do not look back. Each line pulsed with memory, with the fear I had felt, the tension in my muscles, the relentless pressure of the mall itself. I realized then that these rules were not merely guidance, they were survival. I tried to sleep that day, but the shadows followed me into my dreams. Every corner of my apartment seemed to stretch, elongate, twist. The hum of my refrigerator became the whisper of movement. The flicker of sunlight across the floor became the shift of figures. I kept the list on the table, a silent anchor to reality. reminding me that following the rules was the difference between being caught and surviving. By evening, I knew I would return. I couldn't resist it entirely. Part of me needed closure. Part of me needed answers. The mall had shown me a glimpse of something beyond normal perception, something that obeyed rules I didn't yet understand. And I needed to see if the rules would work again, if the boundaries would hold, if I could navigate the darkness without breaking. Night fell, and I found myself once more at the entrance, key in hand. The mall loomed before me like a living entity, walls stretching impossibly, shadows pooling unnaturally. I entered, heart pounding, senses heightened. The office was unchanged, monitors flickering, screens grainy. I set the list on the desk, tracing each line with my eyes, repeating them silently as if invoking a protective chant. The rules were my lifeline, my tether to survival. I began my rounds, flashlight in hand, breathing shallow, each step measured. The mannequins waited, still but alert. I kept my gaze forward, obeying every rule. The play area was empty, though I felt the faint echo of laughter from some unseen source. Fabric rustled behind me, subtle and deliberate. I ignored it, moving with purpose. The abandoned stores whispered their secrets, voices distorted and unclear. Yet I walked on. Rule 5 guided me. Do not listen. I did not. Hours passed in tense silence. Every shadow, every flicker of movement, every faint echo tested me. Yet I survived. I kept the rules in my mind like armor, each one a shield against the unknown. The escalator remained still, the mannequins frozen, the corridors empty, or at least appeared so. The mall's eyes followed, patient, intelligent, testing the limits of my obedience. And I passed each test, slowly, deliberately, step by step. As 6 a.m. approached, I returned to the office, relief flooding my body. The sun would rise soon, and the mall would return to its mundane self. I locked the office door, checked the monitors, and finally let myself breathe. I had survived. I had obeyed. The rules had held, protecting me from forces beyond comprehension. I knew that the mall would wait, patient and eternal, ready for the next unwary soul. But for now, I was safe. I left the mall that morning, the sun warming my back, shadows receding into corners. The list in my pocket, a quiet reminder of the night's trials. The experience had changed me. I had seen what lurked beyond ordinary perception. obeyed rules I barely understood, and survived a night in a place that was far from normal. And though I would never return, though I would never speak of it openly, I knew the truth. Some places are alive at night, and survival requires more than courage. It requires obedience, awareness, and respect for the rules. The mall's secrets remained, waiting for the next shift, the next guard, the next unsuspecting soul. And I knew, deep down, that the rules, the shadows, and the figures would persist, eternal and patient, in the darkness that humans rarely see, guarding the boundaries of a reality that was never meant to be understood.